I think I broke
Unlike
a fiddle
Uncle
player.
Bonsai, we don't have to pay for this by the inch.
Yes. They have a live recording where they mention that.
Welcome back. This is a groundbreaking video. If you look on YouTube, I don't think you're going to find a video on this episode chapter. Maybe there's no survivors. Nobody makes it this far, right? But I haven't found one. I looked around to see if there were others, but I don't see anybody that's made it this far. So we're breaking ground, folks, and I appreciate your support, your comments, even your challenges, everything. I appreciate the whole thing, and we're going to make it. We're going to make it all the way through, and we're in the home stretch now. The next few episodes are mind benders. They're pretty rough. This one is pretty easy. The hardest part is how do we pronounce it, and I've seen Nausicaa. Nausicaa. I'm going to stick with Nausicaa. I think that makes the most sense, and as I research pronunciation, I found that to be rather prevalent, so that's what we're going to use, Nausicaa. Now, as always, we're going to start with what happens in Ulysses. So at this point, his ship's destroyed. This guy's been trying to get home forever. It's been out, I think it's 9-something years trying to get home. His ship's destroyed, Odysseus, and he's on a raft. He's in a big storm, and Poseidon is really out to get him. Okay, so Poseidon, sea god, is making life miserable for Odysseus. He's on a raft in a storm. He's knocked off the raft, so now he doesn't even have the raft. He swims for 2 days and ends up on this island. Now, after swimming for 2 days, he's exhausted. He collapses. His clothes are gone, so he's naked on the beach. He covers himself with some branches for concealment, and he passes out. He just falls asleep. Now, on this island, there is a king, and his daughter is Nausicaa, and she's with her maidens, her attendants, her girlfriends, and they go down to the river to do laundry and bathe. So they're going to wash clothes and bathe. Kind of interesting that the king's daughter is down doing the laundry, but I think maybe the bathing part is more her thing, right? So these girls go down to the river where the river meets the sea, and they're washing the clothes, and they put the clothes out to dry, and while the clothes are drying, they play a ball game, and they're throwing this ball around, and the ball rolls down the beach, and one of the girls goes to get it, and she comes upon Odysseus, who is covered in branches and naked, and he gets up. Now, he doesn't want to scare him away because here he is on this island. He's seen a lot of hostility in his day. He doesn't know exactly what to expect from these people. You know, maybe the guys will show up and kill him, or, you know, maybe there's giants, or, you know, he's run into a lot of stuff, so he wants to kind of play it easy. So he's kind of cautious and says, hey, you know, I'm just shipwrecked, trying to get home, friendly guy. And, of course, the girls flee. And Nausicaa stays, and she speaks with him, and she decides she likes this cat, right? So she's going to take him home to Dad. So they take him back to the palace. The father's keen on this guy. He's going to fix his daughter up with him because she likes him. And they give him clothes and food and something to drink. And they have this banquet. And he tells the father, he says, look, you know, all I really want is to get back home to Ithaca. That's really what I want. Your daughter's cool and all, but I'd really like to get back to Ithaca. So the girl is disappointed, but she doesn't make a big deal of it. There's no drama like in the other episodes. She lets it go. The father fixes him up with a ship and arranges for him to sail back to Ithaca. Now, there's a little background action with the gods on this episode. For one, Athena, to protect him, has made him be perceived as unusually attractive. So everybody thinks, man, he's so charming and so good looking and adorable. He's just the greatest, right? Because Athena has put this spell down. Now, that works because everybody likes him. They're charmed. They don't mistrust him. The daughter really speaks on his behalf. The king likes the guy. Everybody likes him. So he doesn't have any trouble there for a change, right? Nobody's going to eat him or poke his eyes out or anything crazy. And so we have that. Athena has intervened on his behalf. Then the other gods think, geez, you know, we've been messing with this guy for 10 years. So, you know, let's get Poseidon to just kind of chill so he can get home. So they put a spell on Poseidon that he will sleep long enough for Odysseus to get home. So the king hooks him up with a ship, and he gets on the ship. Poseidon takes this protracted nap, and Odysseus can now sail home. He's not there yet, but the gods have said enough is enough, and they've arranged for him to get home. The king's given him the boat, and everything looks good in his direction now for a change, finally. That is what transpires in the Odyssey. Now let's take a look at what happens in this episode in Ulysses. Little bit of background. It's now 8 o'clock, so this has been our biggest time jump. Most of the time jumps have been like hour and a half. You know, he gets up in the morning, has breakfast, takes a bath, goes to the funeral, has lunch. You know, pretty small increments. Now it's after 8 o'clock at night, so it's, you know, little between 8 and 8:30, and so it's much later. In the evening, the sun is starting to set, and the description that Joyce gives is really beautiful. I would go back and read that first, particularly the first couple lines. It's really beautiful the way he describes it and sets the scene. Now, in the background, we can hear this service going on. There's a church service for these guys that have taken the pledge to give up drinking, right? So they're having this service, and they're devoting themselves to Mary. Okay, so this service revolves around Mary, the Virgin Mary in Catholicism. And so we have these little interjections of this Catholic service and their devotion to Mary. And Mary is the queen of the sea, they say, the star for the sailors to find their way home. There's a lot of early on references there. Now, Bloom wanders down to the Strand where Stephen was walking earlier in the day. Now, these guys' paths have crossed a number of times. They crossed on the way to the funeral. They crossed at the library. They crossed at the museum. They now cross in a sense where Bloom is down where Stephen was. So they've kind of done this dance all day long. And Bloom is just not ready to go home. He's tired. He's going to take a little breather. He's just come from the meeting at Dignam's house with the widow. He's trying to arrange to get the money from the insurance policy for them. And so he's just come from there. And it's been a hard day. You know, he's encountered the bigotry, and he's had to deal with little digs all day long, and a funeral, and his wife is having this affair, and that time has passed now because Boylan, and he's seen Boylan throughout the day, and he knows he was headed for their house, and that was 4 o'clock, so he knows that's either finished or still going. It's been a rough day for old Bloom. So he just wants to relax. And he sees these girls with their younger brothers, and the very younger. I mean, it's 2 4-year-olds and a almost 1-year-old baby. And they're watching the kids, and the kids are playing on the beach. And the girls go there, it says, for talking about things the girls talk about. And so this is a regular thing that they go there and just hang out. So that sets the scene. That's the hour. It's been a warm day. There was a little rain earlier, but it's still been a very warm day, and it's a nice place to relax. Now the bazaar is about to start up, that charity event for the hospital, and there's some fireworks going on, which happen a bit later. There's interesting tie-in with that. Now, one thing I've wondered about is the significance of the kids, the young kids. We have 2 4-year-olds, twins, and boys, and we have a 1-year-old, 8, 9. That's like how long's Rudy? You know, I don't know. Maybe there's a tie-in. Maybe it's just nothing. But it seems kind of interesting to me because Joyce is pretty specific in mentioning their ages and right down to the number of days with the baby. So it seems to me there's a significance in that. So they're on the beach, and we have Gerty Mcdowell. And she could be our central character at least for about 3/4 of this episode, and then it switches to the thoughts that Bloom has. Gerty is described as the absolute perfection of Irish girlhood, Irish perfection, and we get a description of her from her feet all the way to her hair. Her feet are perfect and small, and she has perfect ankles and perfect leg shape. Her skin is milky white. In fact, she soaks her hands in lemon juice and some lotion to make them white. And she does all this cosmetic stuff to just be perfect. She gets them from the beauty magazines, all these tips and lotions. And she has the nice white porcelain skin. Now, as we get this description, we have in the background this service that's going on that's centered around Mary. So we have kind of a amorphous here with Mary and Gerty Mcdowell, that there's a kind of a blending of these characters. So we get a little description of Gerty, and then we get a little injection from the service that's happening up there. So there's a obvious comparison of Gerty Mcdowell to Mary, and we hear about how perfect and wonderful she is, and then in her mind she looks at Bloom and she sees this dark, handsome stranger, and she notices that he's dark dressed, you know, he's in mourning, and she wonders, you know, what his story is, and of course, you know, if he's a widower, and of course she wonders the ultimate question: is he married? You know, if he's not a widower, maybe he's mourning something else, or, you know, is he married? And she wonders about his story, and he is the perfectly handsome, foreign, dark, mysterious stranger. And her fantasy goes all the way from him being this handsome, dark stranger to marrying the guy, having breakfast, and what their life would be like. And this happens all within a course of half an hour. So she's kind of delusional Gerty. And more than that, there's a little warpness here. Now, we spoke before that we can picture all these people in this book, and yet we don't have any descriptions. There's no real descriptions of people except for little side things. Like we have the description of the guy that's his mouth's like this, he could whisper in his own ear, right? And so we can kind of picture this guy, you know. But we don't really have a description of Bloom except for his walk, which is kind of rigid, maybe penguin-like. We know he's a tall guy. The kids kind of mock him with their robotic walk. We have little stuff like that, but we don't really have a clear description of Bloom. Now, we get these condescending cracks about Bloom, where, you know, somebody says, there's a big pimply-nosed guy, and they make these kind of nasty remarks about him, and they compare him often to Molly and say, how did some slough like that end up with her? You know, they're mystified by that one. Now, Gerty's description of Bloom is very interesting because he's tall, dark, handsome. He's the picture of perfection. It's definitely not what we've seen from other people's description of Bloom. Now, I'm not saying Bloom is really ugly, she sees him as handsome, or Bloom is really handsome and they see him as ugly. It's probably somewhere in between. I think Bloom is average guy, and, you know, people that don't like him see him as ugly, and this girl's infatuated because she's a little delusional anyway, sees him as walking perfection. So Joyce is making a point here. Now, what's the point? We're back on this idea of sentimentality. We have the ultimate sentimentality here, and that she sees this stranger and he's the perfect guy. And she envisions this life together, right? Where she makes brekkie, and they sit down to their toast and eggs, and then she thinks, well, why can't people eat more delicate things like flowers and roses? You know, so she's very, very sentimental. She's very wrapped around that axle of sentimentality. Now, there's some interesting stuff that gets put together here. We get a reference to her hanging a picture in the outhouse of the halcyon days. Now, the halcyon days, those are the good old days, the glory days, when everything was perfect. And there's a guy carrying flowers and everything is beautiful. And she focuses on that when she's in the outhouse. This is in very, very stark contrast to Bloom and who Bloom is. Bloom is a man of the body. The idea that Bloom would ever switch from, you know, eats with relish the inner organs of beasts and fowl to having roses for for breakfast, I think it just doesn't cut it. And even Gerty's fantasy goes to, you know, he doesn't even really want to eat, and he goes to kiss her goodbye before he goes off to doing commerce. So obviously he's going to be very successful, but he doesn't even really kiss her. In the process of coming in to kiss her, he's enraptured by her and stares her deeply in the eyes, and you know, that's it. There's nothing really physical there. And then she even makes an allusion about that other stuff. You know, we don't need that other stuff, though some men do, apparently, and she has a little reference there. But you know, not them. You know, certainly they wouldn't need it. Now, in her fantasy life, she has, you'll notice, nothing to do with little kids. It's not like, you know, she and this tall, dark stranger will be happily ever after with their 5 Irish Catholic children. There's no mention of that. There's no room for kids. In fact, she really doesn't like kids. She doesn't speak very well of the kids that are there. She's not interested in them. She doesn't like dealing with them. I think she finds the whole kid thing rather distasteful. She is completely in a mixed up delusional kind of world, well beyond like a teenage fantasy thing. She's out there. Now, where did she learn of the halcyon days and what that means? You know, the good old days when everything is perfect and wonderful and flowery and kind and beautiful. She learned of that definition from Grandpa Giltrap. Now, who is Grandpa Giltrap? Her grandfather, the citizen. Now, Bloom has just had this encounter with the citizen. That's her grandfather. So we're getting, Joyce is explaining to us more of this sentimentality and how he's taking it, of course, to extreme. And he's showing us that the church fosters this same kind of sentimentality. It's, you know, there's different branches of it, but the church gives us the same kind of everything wonderful fantasy. Gerty has this sentimentality of, you know, if she has the makeup and does everything right, the life will be perfect. And she speaks of Grandpa Giltrap's dog. Now, remember the mutt and how the people in the bar talked about this mangy, dirty, drooling dog. And the guy doesn't even want to touch him, and he goes to give him a biscuit, and he about takes his hand off, and the dog's just a mongrel beast. Now, she refers to this fine, stately animal that's so smart he can practically talk, right? So her view, her worldview is extremely distorted. And we get a distorted view of her, you know, where, you know, she has the most perfect pale skin. Well, it turns out she's taking iron pills because she's anemic. So behind every one of her beauties lies a flaw. You know, the perfect pale white skin is anemia. Her wonderful, attractive eyes is eye makeup technique that she learned from a magazine. So everything about her is contrived, and it's kind of creepy, really. So let's go on a little bit. She is repulsed by all bodily functions. She is very much in contrast with Bloom. Very much in contrast with Bloom. Now, Bloom, we know, is a bit of a voyeur, right? He's always trying to catch a glimpse of ankle or look up a skirt, you know, when a woman is getting into a carriage, you know, Bloom tries to see it, and McCoy blocks his view early on. So we know Bloom likes to look. To this point, okay, so let's look at this a little bit deeper. Let's go a little further with it, okay? Gerty, even though she is not of the body, she has this not of the body, meaning that the eating bodily functions are distasteful for her. But she knows that he has desire. She can sense it. I don't think she senses to a full extent what's going on. I think that is outside of her experience. Bloom has his hand in his pocket, and he's making himself happy. I know there's some people that I don't want to make this too. I don't want to offend anybody, so I'm going to leave it at that. You know what he's doing. One of the friends goes over to ask Bloom what time it is, and he takes his hand out of his pocket. Just makes it rather obvious. She knows what's going on. She knows what he's doing. And he looks at his watch, and his watch has stopped. And it stopped around 4 o'clock. And Bloom thinks, you know, that's when Boylan was to show up. I think it's 4:30 is when the watch stopped. That's Boylan is going to meet up with Molly And he thinks, is that when they, and then he tells her his watch has stopped, and he puts his watch back in his hand, back in his pocket, and the fireworks are going, and the girl goes back and says that, they say, what time is it? And he says, well, his waterworks don't work. And I think she knows more than she's letting on with that comment. Now, Bloom, as I said before, this is a rough subject here. He's had kind of a hard day. Everything I say now seems to be an innuendo. Blush, blush. So he's had a rather rough day. He's drained, and again, he's turned on by Gerty. He's aroused, and up to this point, we don't know if Bloom is capable. All right, we know that he and Molly have not had relations since Rudy died, but we don't know if it's an incapacity or what's going on. Now we know Bloom is fully capable, and he has desire. It's there. But he said earlier in a previous episode, not since Rudy, that it's just something changed. It affected him very deeply to lose his son, and he's not recovered from that. But he is capable of being aroused. Okay? So Gerty knows that he is attracted because she sees him looking at her, and he's obviously not looking at the other girls. He's not looking around. He's looking at her. And he's got that look, and she just knows. She knows he's filled with desire, and she puts herself on display. And as the fireworks start, she leans back and grabs her knee and leans back so she doesn't fall, and puts herself on display. So she's conscious of this, and she allows it. Now, we know what happens. The kids say, "Oh, fireworks," and it's up like a rocket, down like a stick. So we know he has satisfied himself. The kids rush off, and they're yelling fireworks, and there's a pretty good description of the, ooh, ah, ooh, ah, ooh. Then it builds, and then, the Roman candle goes off, and the kids run to go see the fireworks, and the other girls get up, and they run after the kids. And so there's this vigor that we see. And then Gerty gets up, and she's walking rather slow and stiffly, and Bloom thinks, tight boots, tight shoes, what is it? And then it hits him. Lame. She's lame. If you read that through and you could follow what was happening up to that point, it hits you like a revulsion. That he's had this attraction. The young girl put herself on display. He got turned on. He pleasures himself, and then she gets up and she's lame. There's a ickiness about it. Joyce just sets us up perfectly with this, because the whole thing is flawed. Her beauty is flawed. Her thinking is flawed. Everything about this is flawed. Now, a couple of things. One, the most interesting part of this episode, in my opinion, of course, the whole thing has to be there for it to work, but I think what is the most interesting is when Bloom is left alone to his thoughts. Read that part, the last fourth of the chapter, slowly. Read it very slowly. Bloom has a number of very fascinating thoughts about life, women, his life, Molly, his daughter. It's just some fascinating stuff there, and it's very poetic writing. It's beautiful stuff. Another interesting point is, the book was banned. It was censored when it first came out. It was censored in the U.S. It was banned. And it was not banned because of this chapter. Okay? It was banned for what Molly says, not what she does, not for any action like that, but the book was banned for what Molly says or thinks in the last chapter is what got the book banned. Molly's thoughts of the last chapter. Not this. So here's this guy pleasuring himself to a minor on the beach in public, and that didn't do it. That wasn't the reason the book was censored. I think that's kind of interesting. It's a bit of kind of, you could call it sexism. Another interesting thing to look at is all the references of men in this chapter. Now, we get the idea that Gerty is an assemblage and it's fake, like a Hollywood set. It's not real. She's not real. I mean, she's makeup and iron pills and false thinking. There's nothing real about her, even though the chapter starts with her being the absolute idea of the perfection of Irish girlhood. She ain't it. I mean, nothing is real about her, right? So in spite of nothing being real about her, look at the references to men throughout the chapter. Her father, Gerty's father, is a drinker. He couldn't make it to Dignam's funeral this morning because his gout had flared up because he's been nonstop drinking for a few days. He also beats her mother, and she says that's something that she can never tolerate as a man that raises his hand to a woman. That's terrible, even though her father does it. Her grandfather is the citizen. There's a revolting character, right? The boys, the twins, are sort of quasi-bratty. They smash each other's, they smash the castle, and they argue and tussle, and then they want the ball away from the baby. So they're kind of selfish little bratty guys, and they're cared for by the women, right? The two girls. All the references to men in the chapter show their dependence on women. Go back and look for any references to men throughout the chapter. Even Dignam, when she talks about her father couldn't make the funeral, to poor Dignam died of a stroke. I mean, she's glossing that over. So all the references to men are kind of polished. Even the reference to her father being a drunk and beating her mother. The boyfriend who isn't going to see her anymore, the reason he's not going to see her anymore is because his father wants him to focus on his studies. So rather than be out, riding his bike underneath her window, he's going to stay home and study, and he's going to go to medical school, and he's going to do great things, and he's going to be very successful, and then he'll be back. He'll come back for her after he completes all his studies and becomes rich and successful. He'll be back. So everything is polished up. The boy's father is a great guy because he wants his son to be successful, and the son, of course, instead of being some bicycle flirtatious guy, and later we'll find out what kind of a neighborhood they're in, he's going to focus on his studies. So everything is shined up. So all the references to men are kind of focused that way. I want to say this one more time, then I'll wrap this up, because I think this chapter is one of the easier ones to digest compared to some of the stuff that we faced and some of the things that are ahead. But really go back and focus on that last fourth of the chapter. Go back and read very slowly. Now, it's important to read it slowly because Bloom is thinking, right? And we don't think 1,000 miles. We don't think it's, I remember when, we don't think like that. We think slowly, and if you read it very slowly, you can really feel Bloom. I mean, this is it. His wife's had the affair. The watch has stopped to remind him of that. He talks about magnetism and the attraction with people and the connection. There's also a very interesting line about he gets the plums, I get the pits. Remember the reference we had earlier about the plums and the women spitting the pits from the top of the Nelson's pillar, right? So Boylan gets the plum, he gets the pit. It's very pathetic. The whole thing is there's a lot of pathos there. Now Joyce, he wanted writing to get real, okay? Now, this isn't for everybody, right? You can have fantasy stories, you can have science fiction, you can have different stuff. Joyce wanted to take realistic writing to a new level. He wanted realism. Now, you can't get much real than the guy getting up in the morning and going to the outhouse and having a full description of defecation, or his description in the bath. That's pretty real, right? Joyce takes this further with the emotions of this man that's had a rough day, and he's down on the beach pleasuring himself while he's looking at this young girl. I mean, that's real, okay? Very important stuff to Joyce. Now, we've talked about that Irish literary revival, and Joyce does not want to go backwards in that kind of writing. He wants to go forward into realism. During this time when he wrote this book, the whole modernism stuff was happening. There were many writers trying to bring a new realism. Virginia Woolf stepped away from plot and into a novel being about ideas, where the novel was a story in the past. Now let's use the novel format to present ideas. So Virginia Woolf wants to write about the relationship of men and women and really express a feminist point of view. Now, this is really new stuff at that time. Now, Virginia Woolf read this book, and she really didn't like it. It was too real. She found it low, vulgar, repugnant. I mean, she really didn't like it. But later, she said that, you know, he really was onto something, and he really did express the reality. And that's what Joyce wanted to get to. Let's get away from all this sentimentality and let's get down to it. Let's get down to the core of where people are. That's what Joyce is digging for, is to get down to that core level. And can you write that? Can we ever know another person? And this is what he's exploring. And it's, to me, it's fascinating stuff. And that last fourth of this chapter really gets there. You can really feel Bloom. Now, on the whole, if we look at novels, you have good guys and bad guys. We look at a character like Bloom. We know he's a good guy. I mean, we've seen all throughout this novel where he's run into people that owe him money because he's loaned, he's helped people out. Big Ben Dollard, he helped him out with some clothes when he had a performance. He's loaned money to people. He gave racing tips. He's helped the widow of Dignam. He went to a funeral, rode with these guys that really treat him like dirt. Bloom is really a good guy on the whole. He's concerned about people. He cares about people. We see numerous references of that. We also know he's flawed. He's got his foibles. He's turned on by this girl. He pleasures himself on a beach. Now, he does it discreetly. He's not a leering, creepy, though, I mean, you may think it's a little creepy, and it probably is a little creepy. But he's a real character that eats, defecates, pleasures himself. He has real emotions, and Joyce is exploring that full gamut. And I think it's interesting. Now, we're going to find in the Circe episode, which is coming up, and that, for me, that was always the toughest one. Now I get it. The first 30 times I really struggled with it. We see Joyce on trial in the Circe episode, and we have to balance all this stuff and come up with a weighing. Now, it's interesting with all this Catholicism that's weaved through and all this Jesuit teaching that Joyce carries around. How do you judge a person? What is the final measure? You know, we've all got flaws. Nobody's perfect. We have good traits, and we have some stuff that's not so great. And we all have that stuff. And Joyce wants us to face the fact that, look, we're human, and these are the things that make us human. Some of it's not very pretty, but it's all part of the package, and we have to accept it. And part of this accepting of me and you and each other is we have to understand that we all have flaws, and we have to understand that there are reasons behind this stuff. There's things that make us what they are. What makes Bloom what he is? I mean, his father committed suicide. He's castigated for being Jewish, so he has this guilt from his father. He has this abandonment of his faith of his father's. Lots of stuff. His wife having an affair. He knows that the degree of that rests with him. There's a lot that make us up. It's not that simple, and Joyce is showing us this in this whole new way of presenting a novel. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's too preachy. Maybe it's interesting to you. To me, this is deep stuff, and it's brilliant. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'd love your comments. I'd like to talk about this chapter. This was a hard one for me. Even though this chapter is one of the easier ones to understand, it's easy to digest, it's pretty easy to know what's going on. It's profound and difficult to talk about, not because it's awkward, but it's so dynamically human that it's hard to express. You don't think so? Think about when Bloom picks up the stick and he starts to write in the sand. I am and then he stops and he throws the stick and it sticks in the ground, and he thinks, if I had tried to do that, I couldn't do it in 100 tries. Have you ever thought that? I have. I've thrown a stick and have it done something like that. If I was trying to do that, it could never happen. What was he about to write? I am a man. I am a Jew. I am a pervert. I mean, and I think we don't need that word. We don't need it, because this is exactly what Joyce is telling us. You can't complete that. You cannot complete that sentence. I mean, think about it for yourself. I am a. There's not anything you could put there that is all of you. Maybe a piece of you. I am a teacher. I am a woman. I am a dog owner. I am a student. But none of those things are who you are. There is nothing that can complete that sentence with any accuracy or completion. Nothing. And Joyce is reminding us of that. And when we look at other people, I think it's important for us to remember that when we see others and we think, he is a... Thanks. Sláinte. See you next time.